Joining us now for the program is Tony Gosling, historian and investigative journalist, joining us out of Bristol, and Said Mohsen Abbas, journalist and political commentator, joining us out of London. Gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you both to the broadcast here. I guess, Said, we'll start with you in London. All these condemnations, they sound great, but what can Palestinians do with these condemnations, Said?
Nothing. The condemnations mean absolutely nothing when they're done in parallel with the continuation of the supply of arms and weapons, the continued veto of anything that really rein in Israel on the UN, etc., and the actual tacit approval of all of these what I describe as Anglo-Zionist establishments in the West. So there's a lot of duplicity, a lot of hypocrisy. But what's clear is that Israel is pushing for a full-on war. What they want to do is to draw the US and NATO and Europe in general into a direct confrontation with the Islamic Republic of Iran in particular, but the axis of resistance on a wider scale. I've got no doubt in my mind that the extremist, certainly the absolute extremist government that is in power now, with the likes of Ben Gvir and Smotrich and Netanyahu, they are hell-bent on political survival being achieved through war and through a regional war and perhaps a world war. Just look at Gvir and his profile. It matches a lot of the far-right rise in Europe in terms of the populist policies, the extremism. He's got 8 convictions. I mean, for goodness sake, of crimes like incitement to racism, possession of propaganda for terrorist organizations, the Catch organization. He's been pushing for violence in places like Sheikh Jarrah since 2021. He's overseen the genocide as the minister who's in charge of supposedly security of this settler colonialist state. So what you've got is extremist, racist, absolute violently inclined individuals who are in power, and they reflect an Israeli society, I'm afraid to say, which is now debating whether it's acceptable for soldiers to rape Palestinian prisoners and to sodomize them and to do other such things. So that's actually a real debate that's going on in Israel. Okay. They've already got a 97% approval for the genocide in Gaza. That's a common statistic. So you're looking at a society which now really revealing how sick it really is, as far as I'm concerned, and the leaders are merely a reflection of that. The US is also actually, by extension, and quite clearly through its complicity, absolutely part and parcel of all that is wrong within what they regard as a neoliberal, secular, society, something they want to export around the world. Yet they can't get their act right on Israel at all, for starters.
Thank you, Said, for your initial thoughts. Tony, welcome to the program. Now, Tony, and I'm glad Said mentioned the rise of the far right in Europe, because it's also everywhere. It's not just Europe, is it? It's in the US, it's in Canada. We're seeing it even in occupied territories. Itamar Ben-Gvir, Tony, and Bezalel Smotrich, 2 guys in his cabinet, completely racist, xenophobic, volatile elements in Netanyahu's so-called farthest right cabinet ever. And we should emphasize they actually represent a significant rise, as Said was saying, of the Israeli people and their way of thinking. And these 2 men continue with these provocative acts that send this clear message to the world that we don't care about the Muslims or the Christian population here in occupied Palestine, in this neck of the woods. This is ours, and the hell with the rest of you. How long, Tony, can they get away with these kind of acts and this kind of thinking and rhetoric behind it and actions behind it?
Well, look, it might not be what you want to hear, but I see Ben Gvir's actions today as reasonably positive, because it's better than having the army coming in with tear gas and shooting people in the Al-Aqsa compound. In a way, if I was there, I would be actually saying, well, good, do some prayers. That's actually positive, and something positive, much better than sending in the troops at Al-Aqsa. You have to understand that these people, the far right, have got plenty of other synagogues or whatever to go to if they want to in Jerusalem. And wouldn't it be nice to be able to welcome other people of the monotheistic faiths, as they used to do in the old days, to maybe even worship and pray together? After all, they're all adherents to the Ten Commandments and the monotheistic faiths. For many centuries have been peaceful, living together there. So it'd be nice to welcome the Zionist population to have some prayers. Much better than tear gas. But obviously, you know, this is a provocation. That's why the EU have said this, and other people around the world. The idea here is just to frustrate and annoy Muslims, particularly, because what they're really trying to start is religious war. Effectively, that's the object here, is for Zionism to be at war with Islam. And I would say, you know, the best reaction to that is say, well, you know, yes, come and do your prayers, but don't bring your tear gas, don't bring your automatic weapons. Leave those behind, and you're welcome to come and pray. So that's my attitude to this particular action. I'm not saying what Ben Gvir and the rest of them are doing is right. It's not. It's just being done to provoke, and there's a lot of racists in there. But the best way to diffuse racism is, I think, is to not to necessarily confront it at a mosque, but to show people that actually you're just the same as them. If you want to go and pray, you can do that. And by the way, the far right that we're seeing in Israel is not really the same as is here in Europe, and certainly in Britain. Much of the far right here has been fueled by particularly by mass immigration, but mainly by the horrendous economic conditions. You know, we've got whole sectors in Britain that cannot operate without bringing in cheap labour from abroad, and that's fueled the far right here. So I think there are some connections, but it's a very, you know, we're not dealing with a kind of expansionist state that's trying to take over here. It's really a reaction against multiculturalism, and particularly the 750,000 migrants that Britain is having to bring in every year now in order to keep its economy going.
And Sayed, a lot of people, to Tony's argument, will make the argument that, I mean, they'll take in a small amount, like they always do, to provoke and get a rise out of Palestinians, a few Jewish people in there to basically go against the status quo. We know Jews are not allowed to pray under the rules and regulations of the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound there. They're allowed to just visit and not stop and pray. They always take a few in that do, and they break that status quo and they violate it. And then what happens? The Palestinians push back, and then guess what ensues? The tear gas and the automatic weapons and the armed settlers, and it's a cycle. And I understand what Tony's saying would be, I mean, they might not have shown the level of, they might not have been accompanied by armed settlers and the military, but that is always what comes next, isn't it, Sayed?
Well, the reality of the matter is that, first of all, this is a violation of the status quo. It's a violation of international law. It's a violation of the authorities that are in charge of the Al-Aqsa compound and what's known as the al-Sharif. So clearly, there's no interfaith going on here. Ben Gvir is a nasty, racist, violent individual who leads a nasty, racist, violent party, and he is now essentially in charge of the security of that nation, which should tell you exactly what the state is of Israel when its own government is employing people who are convicted, 8 convictions and 53 attempted convictions on this fellow. Yet this criminal is given status within the Knesset. So that tells you what the democracy in Israel is, quite frankly. And Netanyahu promoted him in an artificial way just to make sure he stayed in power, because his own corruption and his own nastiness needed to be bolstered by these extreme far right individuals. Anyway, that's parking one thing aside. There was nothing altruistic or interfaith about what Ben Gvir was orchestrating today. He's even violating what Netanyahu, the genocidal criminal, has said on this. He's saying that it's actually you know, he's in violation. So that means that Netanyahu's not even in control of his own ministers. They're going around doing their own thing. That is not even official Israeli policy to do with that compound. Now, the reality is that this kind of whole situation in terms of the connections of groups like this is really linked towards, first of all, fueling the conflict. They are begging Iran to respond in a way which would really justify the Israelis forcing the Americans and the West to come into the war directly. I mean, the Americans and the West already are. They've got special forces operatives. They've got all their reconnaissance. They've got their logistics all working for Israel. They've got their missile batteries there to defend and be on the offensive. So make no mistake, America is and its forces are on the ground. They're involved. So are the British. This is the reality of the matter. That they can hide it whichever way they want, but the fact is that they are part and parcel of this genocide. They are supporting it and are actively supporting it. So this is just another way of really edging towards a war which they really should be thinking very, very carefully about, because the minute the Americans or the British or the Israelis decide to start this war, they've got to evaluate the reality. The Hormuz is the access to 20 or 25% of the global energy and other goods, etc., as well. It is going to be blocked, and when the Hormuz is sunk and destroyed and shut up completely, it will mean there will be an economic disaster of one like nobody's witnessed before, because literally you're going to have an economic meltdown. Now, whether the globalists who are behind most of these wars and who finance America as well as other sides, I would argue, whether they actually want to induce a war which creates global meltdown in order to then have a reset, which has been talked about a lot, the Great Reset, which a lot of people here.
Okay, we're almost out of. Say it.
Yeah,
I'm going to cut you off. We're almost.
Give us a chance here.
We're almost out of time, Tony, hold on. Tony, we're almost out of time. I want to get you. I'll give you your final minute. It just seems, Tony, that this is a sensitive time. It should be a time of tact, rather than provocation, right? I mean, restrictions and violations of at the Al-Aqsa Mosque by the regime and its settlers have led to all the wars between Palestinian resistance.
Right now, you can't expect calm from the Israelis right now. They are desperately trying to provoke something. Because Netanyahu is beleaguered, he's going to jail if he doesn't manage to get this war going that he wants, this religious war. What they're doing, by the way, is the 75th anniversary we've just had of the United Nations signing of the Geneva Conventions, a year after Victor Rothschild here in London, who was a Soviet spy, and Nelson Rockefeller, who was in the United States, got together to get the votes at the United Nations to create the State of Israel. The year after, in 1949, they signed the UN Geneva Conventions, which are the framework now for all international humanitarian law. Well, isn't it interesting? As that generation has all pretty much died off now, they're resurrecting all of the crimes that the Nazis committed in World War II, and they're starting to do those in Gaza, etc. So humanitarian treatment of your enemy, that's fighters. No, they're not. The Hamas fighters are being horrendously treated. There's mass torture and rape going on in Israeli jails, so that one's out of the window, as well as protection of civilians. That's what the Geneva Conventions insist on. And so it's quite clear to everyone that pays attention that we're seeing a resurrection in this kind of devilish, demonic fashion of the same forces that were at work in the Second World War under Adolf Hitler. That is what's now being meted out in the Middle East, that we have to make sure that we don't respond to the provocations in the way they want. Because, so for example, just here in Bristol the other day, we had a whole load of activists smashed a vehicle into a Israeli arms company. So all the time that there's peace, there is the room for people to take civil action against the Israelis. I
apologize,
in places
Tony,
like Britain here.
We're out of time. And gentlemen, sorry for cutting both of you off. Time has gotten the better of us, but stay safe to both of you, and thank you both for joining us on our news review program here. Tony Gosling there, historian and investigative journalist, joining us out of Bristol, and Saeed Mohsen Abbas, a journalist and political commentator, joining us from London. And viewers, this brings us to the end of your Press TV news review program. Thank you for tuning in, and bye-bye for now.